the subject of the lesson is substance, and it's one of my favorites. It has helped me with healings in the past. And the responsive reading is just wonderful. And it seems again to me to encompass so much of the truth in shorter form, the truth that we get in the rest of the lesson. First thing I've noticed and prayed with and encircled all the words that are not tangible by the five senses, as it were, that are as used in Proverbs. Understanding, knowledge, these are real substance. Wisdom, counsel, sound wisdom, strength, honor, durable riches, righteousness, and again, judgment. And all of those have been given to us by our very identity as spiritual ideas of our Father, Mother, God. So that verse 21 is important, that I may cause those that love me to inherit substance, and I will fill their treasures. And when we see our spiritual identity, we inherit. We are heirs, and we are children of God. At that point, it occurred to me to think a little bit about 306 in miscellaneous writings that I'm sure all of us are aware of as a most wonderful statement on angels and supply. At the top of page 307, Mrs. Eddy says, God gives you his spiritual ideas, and in turn they give you daily supplies. Never ask for tomorrow. Is it enough that divine love is an ever-present help? And if you wait, never doubting, you will have all you need every moment. What a glorious inheritance is given to us through the understanding of omnipotent love. More we cannot ask, more we do not want, more we cannot have. That to me is the essential definition of substance. And I turn to it quite frequently and have turned to it in past and made it almost a part of my memory. Now the rest of the responsive reading speaks of God's work in the beginning and then his works of old. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills was, I brought forth. The wonder to me is that we find in the Old Testament the presence of the Christ. There's so much schism, it seems to me, in religious thought when we think, well, the New Testament is the real truth. But the Christ has been around forever. And it shows up in the Old Testament. Here in Proverbs, where we see that it's our spiritual identity that it was in the forever, before this and before that. And I think we have to give such gratitude for that revelation by Mrs. Eddy of the eternity of the Christ. And then the last part of responsive reading, blessed is the man that heareth me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the posts of my doors. For whoso findeth me findeth life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it. The manual comes to mind, because in verse 33, before all these promises that will come when watching daily at my gates and waiting at the posts of my doors, we hear instruction and be wise and refuse it not. For in fact, and this is not a quote, this is my comment, that is real substance. And the manual is so important as a kind of constitution for maintaining our identity spiritually so that we can feel, see only the substance of mind and love. And we as ideas and reflection of those godlike substances. Let's see. In the 1903 issue of the journal, as quoted in September 2012 journal, speaks about the manual. And it just seems to me that the manual embraces this whole definition of and insistence upon spirit as substance. And it's from Mrs. Eddy. Of this I am sure that each rule and bylaw in this manual will increase the spirituality of him who obeys it, invigorate his capacity to heal the sick, to comfort such as mourn, and to awaken the sinner. And it's on Miscellany, page 230. That is how we inherit substance. That is how we see true substance, by following these instructions to open our eyes to our real identity. Now the lesson is very rich. It seems to me like a constitution and a Bill of Rights for man as spiritual. In section 1, we look upon the earth. How manifold are thy works. Thou sendest forth thy spirit. They are created. They are created as a compound idea, which is what the earth is. And the spiritual intuition has us see the invisible things of him from the creation of the world. It's been so helpful to me to hold on to Mrs. definition of earth as a compound idea. Then we're told in 18, we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. The thought comes to me of counterfeits. We cannot be confused by counterfeits. The material world as a counterfeit to the true spiritual world. And again, the manual is a tremendous help for us to see things, see ourselves as spiritual. In section 1 of Science and Health, counterfeits appears. In citation 4, the visible universe and material man are the poor counterfeits of the invisible universe and spiritual man. In that same section, substance is that which is eternal and incapable of discord and decay. Came to me the thought that a double-minded man, it's in the Bible somewhere, is unstable in all his ways. I think it's in the New Testament. When the substance, says this section, when the substance of spirit appears in Christian Science, the nothingness of matter is recognized. So that no longer are we looking with one eye at spirit and one eye at matter. We, in fact, are no longer a double-minded man. And we see earth, ourselves, our fellow man, as spiritual ideas obeying the commands of mind and the commands of love, as the manual teaches us. Section 2 in the Bible about riches of money. The love of money is the root of all evil. And then the last part, that's the first in citation 8, the first part of the line. And then the last part of that same citation, but thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after, and here's the list again of what we reflect, and therefore what we are, after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. And by reflection of spirit, we have all that substance. I'm at the end of that section on charity. Our charity is to see our fellow man, this is how I interpret, as spiritual idea. This is the greatest work that we can do, that we ourselves and our fellow men are in fact beloved of the Lord. And so much healing from that spiritual perspective has been recorded in our periodicals, in Mrs. Eddy's lifetime. It has to be true. I'd love, poetically, I just take a minute to speak of this, about the images of love and hope and substance that come from Isaiah, come from a land that is a dry land. And it comes with a great freshness of water. Citation 11, and the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones. And thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water, whose waters fail not. I think that's such a lovely sense of abundance in true understanding of substance. And we should pray, I believe, for our fellow men who seem to suffer so from drought. But we will be satisfied by God's word. We will be protected and maintained in drought. And we need to know that for the world. Section 2, Science and Health. Some very strong directives of wealth and honesty that we must also pray about, to know that God is mind and is expressing himself always through idea, that we must, in this earthly experience, level wealth with honesty, let worth be judged according to wisdom, and we get better views of humanity. This is the way humanity will rise to better life as more and more we see our spiritual identity. And in this election time, when wealth and honesty are big questions. We need to pray to recognize they are God qualities as reflected in man, and they cannot be adulterated. They cannot be attacked by so-called animal magnetism. They cannot be invaded and lost from the outside by temptation, etc., because there's no outside to God. And there's a strong statement at the end of section 2. A great sacrifice of material things must precede this advanced spiritual understanding. Mrs. Eddy says several times, we must expunge our mortal history from our thought. And that's what we sacrifice. That's what we get rid of by recognizing that we are not mortals trying to get to be spiritual, but that we are already spiritual. Section 3 is all about the restoration of the temple and the generosity of the people in supporting the restoration of the temple. And it also handles our bodies as temple. Every man according as he purposeth, says 2 Corinthians, in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. There was a very interesting article on the payment of the annual tax to the Mother Church. It was in the, it was in the journal. The journal had on its front per capita tax, heartfelt gratitude. And it's September 2012. And I think it was very interesting to recognize what true generosity is. It really has a great deal to do with gratitude. The woman with the 2 pennies that Jesus noted was not giving anything close to wealth, but it was all her wealth, and so was a great deal. And she was expressing great gratitude, a great sense of God's caring for her. She must have been to give all her wealth. What we need to do is give up mortal beliefs and practice what Spirit tells us to do in the giving, in gratitude. The charities are bombarding the mails and the telephone with requests for aid. And I've had to give a lot of prayer to it and to determine what's the right thing to do. I think we all need to do that. There was a very interesting article, very short little one, in the Sentinel of July 9th. The good now and the good ahead. And it handled the idea of giving up mortal beliefs and feeling the support of God and the giving in gratitude for that support. And it spoke about the writer who had been hurt by somebody, a mortal belief that he could be hurt by something that someone did. And one night, when these nagging questions were monopolizing my thought, she thought of a statement in the Science and Health that reads, "We cannot fathom the nature and quality of God's creation while diving into the shallows of mortal belief." So that attracted my attention about what digging deeper really means. Often a practitioner has said to me, well, we have to dig deeper, but it's not into mortal belief. It's deeper in the love of God, understanding our identity as his idea. And then this is what made the article stand out to me. Suddenly, a funny image came to thought. I pictured a scuba diver in my bathtub, diving into the shallows, looking for anything that might be there. I thought about how foolish it would be to spend time and effort using scuba gear to look for things in a bathtub. Anything in the tub would be clearly visible from the surface. And she also thought about a Bible verse, "There is nothing hidden that will not be revealed." That verse assured me that rather than looking for answers from my limited human perspective, in other words, diving into the shallows of mortal belief, I could rely on God, divine mind, to reveal anything I needed to know about the nature and quality of God's creation. And it would have healing results for the writer. That image just came up with this idea of what we have to sacrifice, what we need to know very clearly, and where we get that knowledge. By knowing that we are ideas of God, and he is communicating constantly with us. If we'll just take off our scuba diving equipment, sit quietly in prayer, and we'll hear him. Section 3, Science and Health, speaks again about giving. Giving does not impoverish us in the service of our Maker, neither does withholding enrich us. That's because our giving will be based on reflection, and that is unlimited in supply. Man understands spiritual existence in proportion as his treasures of truth and love are enlarged. Okay, section 4. The first quote is from Mark, which is, many times when I'm reading the lesson, one of my favorite Gospels. It's so cut clear. The first verse, in the beginning, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And in the very first chapter, they brought unto him all that were diseased, and them that were possessed with devils, and he healed many that were sick of divers diseases, and cast out many devils. Now that's just the gospel truth. Nothing about the birth of Jesus, nothing about his relationship, as Matthew tries to establish, to the house of David. It just is, he's the Son of God. And this was what he did, and it proved it. And I just thought that had the cleanliness of Mrs. Eddy's manual statements to us. This is the way it is, guys. Now learn it. And then this introduces, of course, one of Jesus' famous statements, "I and my Father are one." And before Abraham was, I am. And how it riled up those who were steeped in material traditions. But in fact, we recognize that our spiritual identity is at one with the Father, and that Christ has always been. Section 4, I have just written down here what I've already shared with you. I always find it wonderful when we find in the Old Testament so much that involves the Christ. Just recognize it. Let's see, what else? Very strong statement about our being the children of God. Mrs. Eddy says, expunge mortality in yourself and in your neighbor, and you will be directed as to what to be, what you are, rather, and what works to do for your Father because of your identity. Speaks a bit about the Christ, and I again felt such gratitude to Mrs. Eddy for her understanding of what the Christ is. The opposite and false views of the people hid from their sense Christ's sonship with God, which Mark comes out in the very beginning and said, this is the record of Jesus Christ, Son of God. That's who he is. Not Jesus, but Jesus Christ. The Christ as the Son of God. Okay, we need to learn to turn from sin and lose sight of mortal selfhood to find Christ. In the Old Testament, in the New Testament, in the eternal now. Just turn away from mortal selfhood. Section 5, again brought to mind angels that I had quoted from page 306 in Miscellany, I think it was. This is the disciples and the level of their understanding. This is the feeding of the multitude. And you'll notice that disciples counted the fish, counted the bread, and then thought it impossible, although they had sat at Jesus' feet for how long, to understand that God supplies all. And yet they were not yet up to see that. Then, in addition, when the supply had fed everyone there were 12 baskets left. Why did they not then recognize the infinite supply that God provides? Well, because they hadn't learned all their lessons. And I sometimes think that I have a lot of lessons to learn, to know that there is supply left over, probably because there will be some need for some others to have that supply, because angels supply what we need. Section 5 begins with that wonderful, divine love always has met and always will meet every human need. As of course in the section before, 5,000 people's need was met. I remember reading that in a very small society meeting in Rome, Italy, when I took my students there over spring vacation some years ago. And I went to the society for the Sunday service. They went to hear the Pope speak. I had to find my way. It was a very interesting adventure. But I did get there, and I walked into such an atmosphere of love. And when I saw that statement, I just felt I was at home. And it was Marconi's the inventor of the radio, Marconi's granddaughter, who was first reader. And she had a beautiful presentation, very understanding and very uplifting. So that's a very special signature there. Was in English. Everything was in English. Okay. So God is able to supply idea with everything that he needs, but not what he wants. Section 6. I'm looking at the progress of the disciples. So we go from there counting the fish and the bread and seeing it as impossible to feed 5,000 to doubting Thomas in section 6. And Thomas just could not understand what Jesus was teaching until he saw the marks on the body. Mrs. A calls him dull and doubting disciple. And we must be sure that we are not dull and doubting disciples, but are seeing God and man and ourselves as spiritual and free and beloved and maintained and sustained. But how loving it was, I think that he says this, but how loving it was for Jesus to go through the attempt to have matter as the substance of life and show that it is not the supporter of life, that there is no death in God's kingdom. And he went through the crucifixion because the disciples hadn't gotten it yet. It just didn't get it. In fact, even after the crucifixion, they still were thinking of substance as the fish they had to go catch right away, go back to their profession. So he had to appear to show the body, to show that he never died, no matter what the attempt was. That's always a thrilling scene to me. Let's see if there's anything else in this. Let's see. What it takes to escape to himself, mortal and material man seems to be substance, but his sense of substance involves error and therefore is material and temporal. That what we need to escape the beliefs is to fill our thoughts with the truth. What is Mrs. Eddy's expression? To state truths and fill our thought with truths through an intake of love. Now that's a very poor paraphrase of a famous expression of hers in treating the sick. But that is what is necessary, and that's what the manual tells us to do, and that's why it's quite a Bill of Rights for us. And finally, Section 7. This wonderful statement of Ephesians. Christ, the wish that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints What is the breadth and length and depth and height of God's love? Unto him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus throughout ages, world without end. Amen. We must search for, this I love in 16, in citation 23, verse 16, that he should grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might by his Spirit in the inner man. There is Spirit in the inner man. That is our essence. And finally, I love this balance that Mrs. Eddy has in the threeness of, let's see, love giveth to the least spiritual idea might, immortality, and goodness. Might, immortality, and goodness. 3. Which shine through all as the blossom shines through the bud. All the varied expressions of God reflect health, holiness, immortality. The 3. Infinite life, truth, and love. The Holy Trinity, as you would call it. I had a psychology course once, and I'm sorry to quote psychology in our lesson, but there was a sense that 3, number 3, gives a sense of completeness in any expression. And life, truth, and love, Mrs. Eddy uses quite often. And here it is coupled with the health, harmony, immortality. And it is a lovely conclusion to the lesson. Well, that is about the best to do.